Sunday Papers on Off the Ball.
Thanks to Screwfix.ie, championing the trade with a dedicated call centre.
Good morning, you're very welcome to the Sunday Paper Review here on offtheball.com, coming to you live on all of your social media platforms, YouTube, Facebook, Periscope. Looking at a lot of the stories today, with me I have David Sneyd, soccer correspondent for the Irish Daily Mail and Mail on Sunday. How are you, David?
Not too bad. How are you? You all right?
Yeah, not too bad. And Declan Lynch of the Sunday Independent, resident on the Sunday Paper Review. How are you getting on? Nominee as well for Irish Book of the Year for Tony 10.
Yeah. Sponsored by Unpost. What could be more appropriate?
Perfect marketing, I think, is it?
Yeah, I mean, it's just perfect. Everything about Tony's story just seems to have this kind of symmetry, this kind of weird kind of perfection about it, and this is just another example of it, I think, you know.
How was the extra hour for you? Extra hour for you last night?
Well, I spent
I think most of it was travelling in here.
Yeah, it was a really good job we had the extra hour, because with the Dublin City Marathon, trying to get into the centre of Dublin, it's like sort of Napoleon trying to get into Russia at that time, I think would be sort of pretty minor by comparison. All the roads were blocked out by guarded checkpoints everywhere for those of us trying to get from outside of Dublin. You know?
Yeah.
If you live 4 doors down from the studio, maybe it would be okay. But
we'll revisit that for 12 months' time, the next Dublin Marathon, when we book our paper review guests.
Well, what you obviously do is you cancel the Dublin City Marathon. I mean, I think
that is the only solution.
Yeah. It's the only fair solution, I think, you know.
I actually found it fine coming in. I only live not too far away, so it's pretty good.
Well, the paper review is brought to you with Screwfix.ie, championing the trade with a choice of over 20,000 quality trade products. Before we get a look at what is in the meat of the papers today, just a quick look through the headlines, and I think the front page of the Sunday Times probably sums up the mood in football today. A pretty devastating picture of the helicopter crash outside the Leicester City King Power Stadium yesterday. Leicester City Fireball is the headline there, and it goes into detail really about the crash outside the King Power Stadium. The helicopter belonging to the owner of Leicester City Football Club. At the moment, there's no confirmation of who was in the helicopter at the time, but fingers crossed everything is okay there. Elsewhere on the Sunday Independent, they go to a picture of Mo Salah celebrating his goal yesterday. Salah extends his hot streak to take Liverpool clear at the top. And as we said just a couple of minutes ago off air, doesn't seem too long ago when Salah was on a goal drought, but all of a sudden his hot streak is in full flow. Also at the bottom there, pressure builds on GA to deliver fixtures overhaul. This by John Green, talking about how clubs in Roscommon are lobbying the GA really to have a complete overhaul of the county and club fixtures in Gaelic games, especially in light of what's happening today, where the Wicklow senior football champion St Patrick's, they won their county senior title yesterday. They're in Leinster club action this afternoon at 1:30. On the Sunday World, something on the front page and back page as well. Front page, Jackass, shocking image of lost Sam. Mystery man poses with iconic trophy on his crotch as Sam goes missing on New York trip. So the GA Chiefs have reacted with shock after a video showing Sam Maguire, who was apparently out on the lash in New York over the weekend. He appeared to get lost or taken, and has been pictured on social media with a couple of partiers. Also on the back page then, I need more money, says Paul Pogba. He doesn't have enough at the moment. Or says Jose Mourinho, I should say. He says he can't be expected to get more out of his Manchester United side on a day when his future as the club's manager is on the line once again. He's still looking for United to splash cash despite his massive £400 million spend. On the Irish Sunday People, China Toon. Far East Giants offer Rafa a mega bucks escape from Tyneside. Rafa Benitez has been offered a £10 million a year escape route from Newcastle by a Chinese Super League team. And also, grinners, not winners. Warnock, Reds may be top, but they won't pip City. That's after Liverpool beat Cardiff 4-1 yesterday afternoon in the Premier League. On the Sunday Mirror, we have sorted, Jose, we must be more like Juve, and shut it, Pogba, I want to talk, but I've been gagged. Paul Pogba and Jose Mourinho in yet another standoff, it appears. Things don't seem to be going too well for them at the moment. They're playing Everton this afternoon. They'll be on Off the Ball later today. And also on the Irish Sun on Sunday, They lead with a picture of Glenn Hoddle. Harrowing day for football. Also a picture of the devastating scenes at the King Power Stadium yesterday, with that helicopter up in flames. But for the love of Hod, prayers for legend Glenn Hoddle, who collapsed yesterday in BT Sports Studios on his 61st birthday. He's in a serious condition in hospital, but a spokesperson for him says he is doing well at the moment. Gentlemen, I think where we are probably going to start today, though, there are tons of pieces across pretty much all of the Sunday papers on GA violence. Actually, first we were going to talk about the Leicester City helicopter crash yesterday. The Sunday Times in particular have a lot of info on it. Their football correspondent Jonathan Northcroft, who would be a regular at Leicester City, was at the ground yesterday as well. And I think yesterday evening, for a lot of fans, it was just that eerie moment where on BT Sport they were showing the helicopter of the owner taking off, and everyone having a laugh and joke about it, as they probably would normally, and then just a couple of minutes later coming back from an ad break to tell us that the helicopter had crashed out in the car park. And the scenes we would have seen through the night where it's just completely up in flames, emergency services around it. And Jonathan Northcroft goes into a lot of detail really about being on the scene yesterday night in Leicester. And
he's, well, as you mentioned, Leicester seems to be maybe part of his beat, and it's just really shocking. I mentioned to the lads outside, I wasn't aware of this until this morning. It was one of them where normally something like this happens and instantly you're on social media, or it literally was happening while BT were live. But just I was out, didn't see it last night, and then this morning I'm opening the papers and then you just see this, and then you see the headline on the front, the fireball and the picture. It's just shocking. And Jonathan Northcroft, he was there and he has eyewitnesses, and talk of fans running for their lives, because it happened so close to the stadium. It was only a couple of 100 metres away. So as desperate as it is, the Leicester owner was Siwa Hanaprava. Obviously prayers for him, but the fact that no one else seems to have been caught up in this is an absolute miracle. Peter Shilton was there at the match with his wife, and just quote saying how they're on the way home, just totally in shock. It happened straight in front of us as we were leaving the ground. We don't know how it happened. It's horrendous, and just hope everyone's okay. Then there's talk of people seeing the helicopter going as soon as it left the stadium. It's just desperate stuff, and you put it in context of what's happened with that club over the last couple of years and some of the great moments they've had. It's just so tragic. And
their owner was at the front of all of that. The people at Leicester absolutely adore him. And
that's what actually comes through in the pieces. There's talk of the players. There's one bit as well about Kasper Schmeichel was on holiday with his family and they needed him for some commercial work, and the owner actually gave him his helicopter to get him to and from real quick. And he just seems to go above and beyond for players in the club, and some of his generosity. They all got BMWs when they won the league, and it's just it's just the human side. You can't really think about football and all the rest, but it's just so desperately sad to see what's happening.
Yeah, it's hard to know. The conclusions obviously aren't being reached yet and all that, but the obvious instinct you have is that helicopter crashing in the middle of a city, it almost seems that they were lucky to some extent that it didn't crash in a more it says in a car park, which
it was directly outside the stadium.
But there's very little information really about casualties and that, which is obviously maybe they don't know, but so there's that. But your instinct is that if something like this happens, that there could be a lot more carnage if it.
It happened it fell in the car park right outside the stadium, and as we could see there from the amount of witnesses that were around, there were plenty of people in the area.
Yeah.
So,
well, that was it. And even Jonathan Northcroft, he makes the point that obviously journalists who are there, and they were obviously inside the stadium, they would have been filing their match reports or whatever, hear what happened, and then come running out. The photographer from the Sunday Times who was at the game, he's quoted as well, and he's just saying there was a mechanical sound. I thought it was a crane on the railway or something, and then suddenly there was silence, and then it's something switching off, and you hear the mechanical noise, and then it just hits the ground with an almighty crunch, and before you knew it was up in flames in seconds. So it's one of them where, especially with Jonathan Northcroft's piece here, where because he's on the ground and is there, he does paint a picture of what's the immediate aftermath of it and what actually happened, which for people who want to kind of get a sense of just kind of the people who are around, it's actually he does the best job of it, which kind of not that he kind of be proud of that in terms of the situation that's happened, but
and even just holding up the papers there, talking about, you know, Jose Mourinho wants more money, Paul Pogba's in a standoff with his manager, like something like this just completely, you know, it just shows how trivial the day-to-day stories of football really are when something like this happens right outside the ground.
Yeah, no, like we've said it, but that's it. Like it's just a tragedy. Well, it seems we're still waiting for confirmation of what's actually happened, but just that picture and the headline on the Sunday Times, like Leicester City fireball, it's just tragic, it really is. And
we'll keep you up to date as best we can throughout the afternoon on Off the Ball with any developments on that story. But we're going to move now to what I mentioned there earlier on, the sheer amount of stories about and opinion pieces on the epidemic of GAA violence at the moment in club championship matches. And it is this time of the year when we generally see it. That, you know, a lot of people say October, November, it's the great time of the year for club GAA. You get so many county finals, so many great scenes, but as we've seen over the last couple of months, there are just an awful lot of terrible scenes as well.
Yeah, well, you see, this is amazing stuff, because this didn't just suddenly break out in 2018.
Yeah.
I think we can say that, you know, with some degree of certainty. It's been going on forever, but what's extraordinary is that by the simple invention of the smartphone, it's suddenly this epidemic is really it's an epidemic of people actually seeing this stuff. You know, like you go onto Twitter most days now, and there's someone holding up a phone capturing this endless brawl of some kind, right? That's going on in the county semi-final somewhere. And just that extraordinary thing that when you're always watching these things, it's like, how do you deal with it? I mean, there is that thing that people criticise referees and stuff. They're impossible to deal with these things. And then there's always a black comedy aspect to it as well. That at the end of it, what happens? Do you sort of book 2 or 3 players? Or clearly the whole thing has to be stopped, right? Yeah. but a referee then is obliged to take some kind of official sanction, and the official sanctions are so absurd in themselves, which is one of the reasons this thing has been gone for forever, because you can't actually deal with like 40 fellas fighting each other, you know.
Yeah, and I think it's the sanction this week that has irked a lot of people. The fact that the member of the Dingle management team received a proposed 8-week suspension for quite clearly striking the East Kerry player last week in their semi-final replay.
Yeah, but there were a lot of other, we call it a Donnybrook. Remember way back when the compromise rules thing went on in Australia, and there were basically fights, faction fights between, or at least at a national level. You know, the Irish fellas would go out and they would fight with the Australians, right, and it would be on television. Which was the key thing, right? And they started calling it a Donnybrook, which is a word that hadn't been heard for 50 years. It could be a Donnybrook breaking out there. I mean, you call it a melee or a brawl, whatever, you know, but it's basically ungovernable and uncontrollable. It's to do with like the primordial roots of man, really. And, sport to some extent is meant to corral these primitive instincts into some form of organised game. But if the organised game then just becomes a kind of a theatre in which the primordial juices are flowing, you've got a kind of almost an insoluble problem. But like Tommy Conlon, who, as usual, writes an excellent piece with superbly constructed sentences. He gives a litany of this stuff, right? In recent times, and this is probably just the stuff that's been on Twitter, right? Okay. June the 8th, Armagh v Tyrone in the Ulster Under-20 Championship, a mass brawl in the athletic grounds. August 16th, Enniscorthy Rapparees v Duffrey Rovers in Wexford. Referee is assaulted by a pitch invader. September the 14th, Strabane v Stewartstown in Tyrone, a mass brawl in Healy Park. September the 15th, Moy v Eden Dork in Tyrone in Dungannon. 6 players sent off. Sean Kavanagh taken to hospital with concussion and extensive facial damage. September the 23rd, Ballinascreen v Greenlock in Derry. An umpire is pushed over. The referee is assaulted by an in-rushing spectator. October the 4th, Schlockneil v Ballinderry in Derry. Players fighting, players and supporters exchanging insults, players and supporters swinging at each other over the pitchside fence. October the 7th, Downpatrick v Ballyholland in Down. Players engage in a running melee with supporters that spills over into the car park. October the 7th, Camross v Rathdowney Errol in Laois. Ross King of Rathdowney is taken to hospital with serious facial and dental damage. October 21st, East Kerry v Dingle, a mass brawl. An East Kerry player punched in the face by an encroaching Dingle selector. October 20th, I'll be finished soon. October 22nd, Kilshannig Miners v St Finbarr's Miners in Cork. 5 players sent off, swinging fists, another running brawl. So that's what we know, right?
The Dublin Marathon is now over. You just say, listen all.
But when that's all listed out, that's when you really just kind of look at it and say, like, what is going on?
But it's been going on forever. This is always, but what's happened is, it's fascinating just about the way we are, really, you know, because what's always happened with these things is, say, the provincial papers have, shall we say, a kind of a diplomatic attitude to these things, because there's an automatic defensive mechanism which starts off when something like this happens. The first thought is the Dublin 4 media are going to make a meal out of this one, right? They're going to come down here and they're going to be telling us what to do and how to run our lives. So the first thing is we won't sort of admit that it happened, right? And that kind of you know, defensiveness has been built into the culture for generations. So that,
in fairness, the paper down in Carlow, they've covered it pretty.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, like it's so. But like the smartphone, you see, is the great enemy of that. You could do that for decades, right? Because nobody who knew, like who else was, you know, there was no other way that the information would really be so obviously brought out. What would happen occasionally is that RTE would have a camera at a match, and you know, a fight would break out, and they would show it, and then they would be castigated by the Gaels for, you know, Dublin 4 media coming down here telling us what to do, right? So, but they would give, you know, an occasional insight, but now every match has like has the Dublin 4 media, if you like, you know, thanks to Steve Jobs and his friends. Like it's really interesting that, like, see, I'm not kind of, you know, I don't have much sort of to say about the GAA here. The GAA are very progressive in a lot of ways these days, in ways they used to be. You know what I mean? There was a time I would have been very critical about them in a lot of ways, simply because they paid homage to a brutal culture which involved things like the Artane Boys band and all that, and to some extent, you know, like they never renounced that. You know, they were hand in glove with that repressive kind of gulag culture. But they've changed a great deal in recent times. Say, for example, their stance on gambling is really admirable. They're really quite progressive in a lot of ways. And so this is a real challenge for them, because it goes to the kind of essence of the game. This stuff, like, you know, this is just part of the game, right? And it is really difficult to deal with it without kind of taking away some essential aspect of it, you know?
You'd sort of wonder, in terms of what you've said there about how they can be progressive, you sort of wonder, even just from reading the different kind of commentators in the papers today, if maybe the top brass at the GAA sort of know, well, actually, this has been going on for so long and we're not going to be able to change it.
Yeah, and
even with, like, you sort of wonder, maybe is that, like, the statements during the week were kind of not, like, that they came out weren't sort of, they were almost playing it down as if it was a minor thing. But
we need to stop this happening. Let's just end this now.
Yeah, but then
that's not going to do anything, is
that's
it?
it. So, like, Michael Duignan just circled it, and it sort of ties in what Declan was saying, where he says here, let's zone in on the last couple of weeks. We all know that violent scenes at GAA matches are nothing new. Like, just real casual there, like as if something like a selector running onto a pitch and digging a fella is grand, or fights in a car park. It's just crazy stuff. And then he moves on, but the differences between past incidents and now, what we're seeing, are twofold. Firstly, social media and the publicity immediately generated with videos posted online, and then this has got actually pretty funny. Secondly, the power of those involved. The gym culture of players means there is a lot more potential for someone to get seriously injured now. Like, obviously that's in the Irish Mail Sunday we on paper, but like, that seems quite bizarre to make that point about the gym culture, as if, well, the rows that happened 25 years ago were grand because
we were all weak.
Lads were all weak, hung over the bits after 10 points the night before, whereas now they've probably been doing 2 gym sessions before the match and would cause more trouble. Like, that's a bit bizarre, but you see the point that Michael is making. And then with Mark O'Shea as well, in the Mail's piece, and it starts off really well. He says as well, which is kind of a really good line. He sort of says, because obviously this first happened with us, kind of maybe he thought it was an Ulster issue, and he brings it down and says, if there's one good thing to come out of the brawl in Austin Stack Park last weekend, it's that the sense that we're knee deep in the mire together. So he sort of is then appreciating, well, hold on, this is a serious problem. And then he deals with the game, with the match, obviously down in Kerry, so he obviously would have maybe a bit more of an insight. And he brings up that there was vile sledging in the match, and that maybe that played a part. And he says players have a duty to behave, but that is much harder to do when your marker is mouthing off at you for the whole game. Referees must play a part here too. Sledging is supposed to be a black card offence. If a referee hears a player verbally abusing an opponent, he has a responsibility to use that sanction. Again, sorry, but that sentence could just finish with players have a duty to behave. Like,
rather than the referee has a duty to step in first.
Yeah, well, obviously a referee has a duty in terms of the sledging amongst the players. Well, how can a referee stop a selector or someone from off the pitch coming on in a brawl and thumping some fella like? And then he gets, was it an 8 week?
An 8 week.
8 week suspension. Like, it seems as if
it was Michael Foley in the Sunday Times. He had a small kind of a sidebar piece, and he mentioned that they had the room potentially to suspend for up to 96 weeks here. 8 weeks was the minimum, and we've all seen the punch, how clear and obvious it was. How that falls into the minimum category?
Yeah, there's always been that kind of long-running black joke associated with this as well, that players would be suspended during the off-season. Like, they'd be suspended from the day that all Gaelic football stopped.
If Dingle lose today in the Kerry football final, he's been suspended for a game.
I know. Well, you see, at the same time, I do have a certain sympathy for the administrators here. I wouldn't have a clue how to even begin to deal with this. I just don't know what you do. Like, I mean, in any well-run society, the whole thing would just be stopped. Do you know what I mean? What do you do when 40 men are fighting? I don't know. Like, it's beyond kind of sort of administrators' control at that stage. I mean, do you just suspend them all for life? I don't know. I mean, 40 people who would otherwise be contributing quite a lot to their club, for some reason, are beating the head off each other in public, right, for about 15 minutes, and no one shouting stop. So, like, I don't know what you do about that. It's a human nature issue, like, really, as much as...
I don't know if I'm just coming at this from a point of view of someone who would go to a lot of League of Ireland and would have grown up playing soccer. But if someone comes onto the pitch and punches a player, what has that person got to do with, like, maybe he's involved with the community and all the rest, but that person should just be banned. Genuinely, that should be, like, like what kind of right is a selector come on and, like, thump a fella? Should
there be more of an onus then on specific clubs rather than the GAs itself to take action against one of their own who's done something like that?
Maybe it does. Like the GAA, like they're the ones who obviously run the games. You know what I mean? Like, a club isn't going to get rid of someone who's probably entrenched in the community and probably does all manner of things. He's a volunteer. I appreciate he probably has given his life to the club or whatever, and he could be a great fella and all the rest of it. But when you come on the pitch and it's an act of violence, that's on the street. I know it's said, but if that's on the street, that person is going to be in front of the courts. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So, like, there is no defending it. And even, like, the bit what Mark was saying about, Mark O'Shea in the Mail saying about kind of the players have a duty to behave, but this isn't even a player. This is someone who has no right being on the pitch. So,
like, the only thing, like, I mean, the exposure of the thing is vital. Do you know what I mean? That will, that's some kind of progress. Like, that case of Ross King, in Laois, it was actually the captain of the Laois hurlers.
Yeah.
This inhorrendous injury from the butt of a hurdle, that his mouth and dental work has to be done. Just a terrible injury.
And a very interesting piece about that by Dennis Walsh.
Dennis Walsh, very good piece. And I'd seen about that during the week as well. And there was just this sense as well that, like, he didn't get much sort of sympathy from the other side, for it, to say the least. Do you know what I mean? That there wasn't a sense that, like, something really awful has happened here and we stepped out of line. Do you know what I mean? So that the culture there is really wrong, and it's very hard to legislate against culture, or to bring in rules or regulations against culture. I guess, like, the more it's exposed, maybe the more unacceptable it gets. Something happens, and then it gets better because literally everyone can see. One of the main problems is that nobody could really see this before, or at least nobody outside that culture really either cared or could see it. So it went on out there somewhere, right? But it's now in everybody's face. And I think that is the only thing, far more than just administrators trying to suspend everybody for life. That is maybe the only thing that will change it. It just gradually becomes unacceptable because it's too disgraceful to look at. For everyone knows that it's gone on now and can see it. So
surely, though, for that to be sped along, someone needs to be properly punished in terms of a ban. Otherwise it could take years. And like as you mentioned, like the Ross King stuff. Like when you read it in the Sunday Times with Dennis Walsh's piece, like it's alluded to in the interview he gave in the Times Ireland
with Shane Keegan.
What you call it, like a good League of Ireland man. Yeah. But like, he sort of alludes to some of the stuff that was on social media afterwards, and like we were discussing it outside, like the stuff that was put up online, and it's actually listed here by Dennis. Like that's
the picture with the caption saying "Tooth Fairy does what he likes when he likes." Yeah,
like it's really bad, and then even like the fact that like this fellow has spent $5,000 now on obviously recovering, and then 2 of his teeth are dead. Like,
couldn't eat solids for more than 2 weeks.
And then he has to deal with that, and like. It's just really, really, really like actually disgraceful to sort of read it in terms of like this is the Carlow captain as well. You would think that
Leash.
Leash. You would think that this would be a fella who would be a bit of an inspiration to some of these fellas, and he's actually like getting taunted.
But you hear as well the senior. It isn't just like these kids. So it isn't that like just kind of low-level madness going on in the lower regions. Like because you do hear as well. At senior level, there'd be some incident of a guy being sort of just knocked out before a match, right? This has always gone on the GA, like they're at it in the tunnel, like, do you know what I mean? Or before the game actually starts, right? Some guy gets a broken jaw or something, right? And they don't talk about it. The people, senior people involved in the game just say, the game went on and these things happen in the game. And, so like, it's something, it's very ingrained there,
Do you think maybe we've romanticised maybe the old stories a bit too much about the good old days when the men were men?
Yeah, well, there was that I think that stuck in my head. Even that great series there about hurling, on RTE, the 2-part series about the game, the history of hurling. There was this description of was it a Kilkenny player losing an eye in the in a All-Ireland final in the 60s, right? And there was a real impression you got that the level of just violence that was going on. People with hurleys armed with deadly weapons, right? Breaking hurleys on each other's, legs and stuff like that. Really serious, extreme kind of violence. So, like, it's kind of weird we're even talking about this as something that has just kind of come to light. It's ancient, So I guess the combination of just trying to have meaningful bans for people, or if you can possibly manage it, and I do think it will change. I just these things do, like the one thing that changes things is exposure and shining a light on them, and just people being able to see them. That does change things. Maybe it'll take a while, but it's the only thing that can change things, I think.
Yeah, it could be kind of contradictory slightly, but it's one of them where you hear commentators say when there's a bit of a brawl, say in the Premier League match, no one likes to see this, and everyone's really thinking, well, actually, we do love to see this. Like, the nature of sport will be that obviously passions are high and things are going to blow over, but are going to maybe cross the line occasionally. But what we see in the GAA and what's being sort of listed is a bit more than that. It kind of points to something that's a bit more deep-rooted than just kind of, as you were mentioning,
pushing and shoving, a bit of kind of underlying niggle throughout the game.
Exactly, yeah. I think it points to a bit more like that one you were mentioning about kind of getting chased into a car park or something, or there was cop on, like.
Yeah, it's funny, even just a short time ago, I just accidentally saw a bit of Liverpool and United when Stevie Gerrard had started playing, right? And a couple of things that struck me. First of all, how brilliant he was, certainly in the early part of his career, and just generally, he was absolutely brilliant. But, you know, out of nowhere, I think Liverpool are leading 2-1 against United, and he lunges at a United player. Like, he so should have got sent off for it, right? And yet it was so dangerous and so unnecessary, right? And so, you know, but you can kind of just about, it was on that level, just about on the edge of, like, you know, enjoying the kind of madness of it, but like finding it like it could have been really dangerous, right? Yeah. But beyond that, you know, we are in here. Do you know what I mean? And like, that's not. Everyone would enjoy the fight, obviously. Do you know what I mean? But like, this is not fighting. It's
but when it's happening every week,
madness.
when it's spilling into the stands, when it's, you know.
Oh yeah, you also have the mentors. The mentors are always great. The mentors will always be with us. Like, you know, the fighting involving players, spectators, and mentors. You know, so which means just a faction fight.
Mm-hmm. One piece, Declan, to move on, that you mentioned when you came in this morning was Alan English's piece in the Sunday Independent. It's an extract from the re-release, an updated release of Stand Up and Fight, 40 years on, next week from when Munster beat the All Blacks at Thomond Park.
Yeah, and it's about like what happened to some of the players. It's great. It's just a great piece, or a great extract from the book, because it's about, like, you know, say Ginger McLaughlin and you know, a couple of just some of the players. Just what happened to them. Moss Keane, who died, obviously, and just a Ginger McLaughlin. He didn't have an easy run through life at all. Do you know what I mean? He had to go off to England to work. He was running a pub in Wales. You know, he's been up and down a lot, you know. And you always had this impression that these people who are involved in glorious deeds spend the rest of their lives in kind of happy wonderland. But it really kind of describes how up and down sort of life was for some of them, at least, you know. And the great thing about it is, as I was reading it, I actually felt that I was starting to read the book, and I was thinking, oh, it's only an extract. Do you know what I mean? This is going to stop now in the next page.
Have you read the book?
I haven't actually. I didn't read it originally, like, you know. So, but it was really odd that I got so engrossed with it, and I found it so interesting that I actually was I forgot that it was an extract. Do you know what I mean? Which is exactly what you want in something. That's
exactly
like that.
The point of it.
Yeah. So it looks great, and you know, very, very real, and very kind of you know, Moss Keane's daughter describing his struggle with cancer and things like that. You know, so excellent stuff. You know. Mm-hmm.
Would you have any memory of it? You wouldn't have.
Only the most vague memories. I wouldn't have been a rugby person anyway. You know. I remember when I was a student for a while in Cork, there was a picture of it in a pub, you know, and I remember looking at that and thinking it didn't really mean much to me as such, because I'm just not a rugby person. But it's and I still don't know how it happened. How did they do it? I mean, how did they actually beat the All Blacks? Nothing has ever emerged that the All Blacks were out carousing or anything the previous night. It seems to have been just a straight thing that they just beat the All Blacks, which is which I haven't seen either that play, the Alone It Stands. Yeah. But I met the man who wrote it once, and you know, thought what a great thing it was to do. I mean, it was hugely successful, wasn't it? That play, and
very.
You know, so it just has that quality, of that amazing quality. It describes well in the extract how on the Munster team, they met, I think, in the Shelbourne Hotel to see the last match of the All Blacks tour against the Barbarians, and they celebrated wildly because the All Blacks won with a kind of a kick very late on, which meant that the Munster win was the only win
on that.
Their only defeat
New Zealand had on that tour.
So that's kind of funny as well, that they were aware that they had this kind of historical thing waiting for them, and but it would be spoiled if there was a little asterisk that said, oh, by the way, the Barbarians beat them as well, you know. So so they celebrated when the All Blacks actually won the last match of the tour.
Mm-hmm. And it harkbacks as well, I think, to what was probably a real romanticised time in rugby, where you had the touring sides playing the midweek matches against the the clubs and the provincial sides, where if you look at what World Rugby are probably trying to do at the moment, bringing in a Nations League of sorts, and you'd probably lose all this.
I imagine it's like, again, similar. I'm not going to best qualified to be discussing rugby, but I know what you mean in terms of like those sort of stories where obviously like lads that are 40 years on are discussing beating the All Blacks, and if they were on tour, and those doubts about whether or not maybe they were out on the RAS or whatever, because there is maybe you lose that kind of element of romance in a professional era with all that as well. So
and like the description of I think Colin Tucker has died. He was he said he was 59 when he died of lung disease. So
very popular Shannon club man.
So and it was from that era when rugby players lived in the real world as well as the professional rugby world. So you look at things. The only example I can think of it is that sometimes, again by accident, I find myself looking at the varsity match in Twickenham every year between Oxford and Cambridge. And you see, because these fellas playing for Oxford and Cambridge will be going on to run the world once they're finished, they look like normal people. Do you know what I mean? They look almost like the rugby players used to look back in the time of. Remember, people used to think Moss Keane was a giant. He was this vast corporation of a man. But now he'd be like a sort of a nippy scrum half or something. So
wingers these days are 17, 18 stone.
Oh, okay, completely. So, but it's the one little window into the past. You can see these lads. These lads aren't going to be sort of damaging themselves too greatly in the gym, right? Because they will have to be, the president of or the vice president of some corporation when they're finished. It's already, laid out there for them. They have the nameplate and all that. So you can just see they're a little bit more kind of. They look like people, like not like me or you, but like, they look like sort of just regular fellas, really, who are quite fit.
But it's interesting, kind of moving on from that on the rugby team with Shane McGrath's piece, column in the Mail on Sunday, just in terms of the difference. So he's kind of mentioned about Conor Murray and the whole keeping his injury sort of separate, and it just sort of plays into that where that wouldn't have even been an issue like 40 years ago. People probably wouldn't even care.
They probably wouldn't have had to keep it a secret.
Yeah, exactly. And he sort of like Shane makes the point about that it's in the public interest for players to kind of make their injuries known. He says teams are weakened by injuries, and such information should be available to fans in deciding to whether or not to attend games or not. That is not invasive or unreasonable. It's the least supporters deserve. And I 100% agree with Shane's piece in terms of players should be available to the media and to fans if a player is injured and what the injury is, because obviously all the rumours will start circulating. Slightly disagree that for fans that it should be up to them in terms of fans deciding to whether or not to attend games. I think if you're a fan,
you should be going anyway.
They're going to go anyway, aren't you? I think it's more so a case of just being upfront and honest about it, really,
Does that come straight from the injury, or would you look at maybe put in a period of
it's a strange one
until you actually know what the problem is?
It's a strange one, because this happened with Jamie Heath, didn't he? He sort of made a big thing about his medical data and all the rest, and it sort of makes sense, especially now with obviously the professional era where a player might maybe not want people to know if he has a certain injury or a weakness or whatever, but it's going to come out for the club if a club is doing a medical to sign a player. Like you see it in football now, where it's a lot of these things now about undisclosed fees for transfers. Yeah. So you'd hate to see that in terms of fellas being injured. Just sort of, it's good to know if a fella is out for say 12 months, if it's a knee injury or what it is. And also from a point of view of a journalist, also helps with the story of plotting these players' career, what they've been through and all the rest. I just think it'd be a terrible shame if players all of a sudden start saying, well, actually, this is for me to know, no one else kind of should know about it. I don't think it's right.
Yeah, there's a very strong theme in the papers this week of terrible injuries and man's inhumanity to man generally. It's it is like a battle zone out there. There's a piece in the Sunday Times by Jonathan Northcroft about Michael Keane. He plays for Everton now, and was Burnley started out with.
Burnley, yeah.
He just had this awful injury again. If I if you would permit me to read a little bit of this.
Go for it.
It's really...
it's brilliantly and probably awfully descriptive.
It's a description of it. It was James Vaughan put a very bad tackle, right? The referee missed it, but it was serious enough for Vaughan to come into the dressing room afterwards to apologise. I played on, Keane recalls, but I knew that something wasn't right, and I had a hole straight through the top of my boot from his studs. I went in at half-time and my foot was aching, but I didn't do anything about it and played the second half. When I took my boot off again, there was blood everywhere. He peeled his sock off to find the skin an inch apart, split away, and a nasty gash. Everton's medical team gave him 8 stitches and he drove home, only to wake the following day in absolute agony. I couldn't put any weight on it. I took 10 minutes to get to the end of my bed. He was driven to training and sent home again with painkillers. He was supposed to be out for 3 weeks, but Ronald Koeman needed him, and the next game was one that he was especially keen to play in, and so he was back training 10 days later in time to face his old club Burnley. The gash was healing, but the foot was numb and needed considerable padding. A size 10 normally, Keane had to play in a size 12 football boot. I could kick a ball, but the feel wasn't the same. I played quite well against Burnley, but it was after that that things took a turn for the worse, right? And it goes on like that.
As if they hadn't already taken a turn.
Here's this chap wearing a size 12 football boot instead of a, right? And interestingly, Ronald Koeman mentioned in here, who was, complaining the other week about Virgil van Dijk playing with a couple of cracked ribs and getting injections, as though he felt this was a new low in lack of player care, But it is remarkable just what players kind of deal with, because we do the only narrative you ever hear is these fellows getting paid 100 grand a week for sitting around watching
rolling around,
big television.
Soft. Can't take a hit.
But the Keane stuff is crazy. Like you stop there about kind of, and then things took a turn for the worse.
Take the
baton. I'll take the baton. But like I won't read verbatim. But like, so he had an inflammation in his foot, and then it started to go up his leg. So he had to go to a private hospital in Liverpool. He was put on antibiotics. The swelling then continued. So then this is in his own words, he said, if I had kept going with my leg, that's when it really gets serious. They said it would have got much worse, and I could have ended up losing my foot. So this is when it then comes in to say what was going on with Everton last season. So obviously David Unsworth is then the kind of the caretaker manager. Like they were, obviously results were brutal. And then so a week after he's come out of hospital, having nearly lost his foot, he's rushed back and plays in a match with having taken loads of painkillers, with a boot that's 2 sizes too big for him. And then, like, this is actually, and Norcroft says it, where it gets really distressing, where he says he was taking these pills. I felt I couldn't concentrate. It was weird for me. I've always been one who's been really focused to be in a game and to find concentration hard. I was trying to follow with Charlie Austin and I just couldn't. I was seeing things and not reacting. Like, this is what like kind of links back into what I was talking about in terms of not maybe being aware of players' injuries. So like Michael Keane has come out and been honest about this, and we knew about he had an injury, but this is a lad who started at Man United, went to Burnley, rebuilt his career. Man United wanted to sign him back and he was going to sign for them, but sort of got a vibe that he wasn't going to be a first team player, so goes to Everton for 25 million, and then he has a shocker of a season. But this is part of the reason why. So like, he's getting like slaughtered by fans. He misses out on going to the World Cup partly because of the injury. But this is where it comes in. People now will be able to say, well, just he's been through so much. You might kind of, you see him playing, I think he's going to play today for Everton against United. You're watching the match and you're sort of hoping, I hope he actually has a really good game. He's been through a lot. Whereas if that's sort of taken away from the reader or the fan knowing what certain players have been through, it's another way of being distant from, and especially Premier League footballers, it's another way. Any sort of link with them kind of makes them feel more human to you, because they're so like.
You see any sign of a vulnerability.
Yeah, it gives you a bit more kind of an appreciation for them. And even on the next page, just again, it's Antonio Rudiger with Jonathan Norcroft, just kind of going off tangent here a little bit, but he talks about growing up in a refugee camp in Germany, and like actually I haven't read the full piece, but it's just part of it I read, but that's something you want to learn a bit more about them. And if players, especially in rugby, because that's one of the benefits of rugby in this country, is that all the best players, I suppose maybe Simon Zebo part, are here, like down in Munster, to be part of the community. You would think, and you would see them about with Leinster, if you're knocking about Rowley's or whatever, you might see some of the lads going in for a coffee or whatever. But like, that's part of why rugby, even as much as the success, why rugby would be kind of is quite popular, because fans can see them, like the GAA players in the community, like that they're part of it. Whereas if they do start becoming distant, and I know it's only something small, but it could be the start of something else then, if people are withholding that sort of stuff. And it's just
it's a bit like
shame.
someone like, you know, everything about, you know, Dayan Lovren has to be seen in the context of the fact that, you know, he did start off his life in the war in the former Yugoslavia, right? And even the old Shaqiri, when Switzerland playing Serbia, wasn't it? And
at
he
the
came
World
up
Cup,
with the Eagle thing.
Eagle celebration.
Yeah. No one knew anything about him before that. Apparently, just this weird little guy, you know.
Parlour.
And but then it suddenly gives a much different. You have a much different impression of him, simply because they realise he must have seen terrible things, like, you know, and. It is kind of interesting when they just become, for some reason, just much more interesting, and you tend to kind of tolerate their excesses a lot more when you or their deficiencies a lot more when you realise that they may have struggled a lot to get there. You know,
that's probably that's how you want.
And David, like, I was just going to bring up, you know, being a soccer correspondent, I imagine you would be interviewing people a lot. Is it tough to get players and people like that to open up about themselves, maybe away from the game?
Yeah, well, I suppose maybe that's probably kind of part of your job, is to try and get them to open up. It can be very difficult when you're kind of in a room and there could be a press officer there. Like, it's different when it's a one-on-one and it could just be you and a player or whatever. Like Jonathan Walters, for example, is fantastic. You get him in a room and he's just brilliant. Like, he'll go through stuff with you, but a lot of the times it can be, especially when it's, say, a grouped interview, there could be a press officer there or sometimes, but it is, well, you have to get stuff out of them as well. And in fairness, like, there's a couple of bits, I'm just reading it here while I was chatting about Antonio Rudiger, and like he mentions here, he says, my mum came to Germany with nothing. We lived in a refugee place with all my sisters and brothers together in one room. This is the way I grew up, and God, I am not ashamed of anything. He mentions, you know, that building that was on fire, Grenfell, our building was something like that. All the refugees were living there from Sierra Leone. There was Arabs, other Africans, everything mixed. Life wasn't easy, but we understood. That's why we came here to Europe, to do good things, not to abuse what is good there, but to try and go on with the system. And that is, like, I'm actually going to read this piece properly later on, but like, that's actually, like, that's what 99% of, like, communities are like. We've had a presidential election where a certain candidate is making disgraceful comments about a whole group of people, but, like, just listening from what Antonio Rudiger was saying there, like, it's actually a really good interview. I wish I had read it probably before I came in.
Yeah, and they're two very interesting pieces, because it's just,
and they're side by side as well, which is good.
Opening up and you know, having interviewed people before as well, sometimes they're eager not to say anything. It'll be pinned up on a dressing room wall, and they kind of tend to overcompensate then maybe and say nothing at all. But you know, these kind of stories, this background information on them, it's not something that's ever going to be held against them.
Sure, and another thing is, though, I've never understood. I know there's sort of sort of some. There's a kind of view in journalism that, you know, footballers are not interesting because they don't give interesting interviews. You know, I've never had any sense that they are supposed to be interesting in that way. Like, do you know what I mean? Leo Messi never has to say anything for the rest of his life. You know, it's that, you know, I mean, he's an artist. He's you know, he does what he does is play football. That is his contribution. You know, to expect him to be able to sort of, you know, speak on the, you know, the situation of the war in the former Yugoslavia as well. You know, that's not what he does. Like, it's like sort of expecting, you know, a painter to be able to sort of talk about farming as well. They're totally different things, right? But if you kind of, you know, if you happen to be aware of that someone has a very interesting background, particularly interesting background, I mean, most footballers, you know, to this day come from very poor backgrounds, you know, and it's very interesting as well that when you see in places in Ireland and Scotland and places where you have much higher standard of living generally now, maybe that's one of the reasons that we don't produce any good footballers anymore. I mean, Scotland is incredible. It's like a whole species has vanished. I mean, the David Attenborough should be up there saying, you know, the disappearance of the Scottish footballer. Like, you know, within living memory, there was people. They weren't just very good footballers; they were particularly brilliant Scottish footballers. They had this gene kind of of brilliance that was almost unique in the football world. They've all gone. they've vanished off the face of the earth, like the like one of those things that vanishes in David Attenborough programs. And there should be far more, sort of interest in it, and sociological interest, and because it's really interesting. And here as well, we really aren't producing, the kind of footballers we used to, and so that's why like the South America is still almost poor enough to produce these extraordinary footballers that they used to do, but but you can almost guarantee that all of them. Not all, but the vast majority are coming from poor backgrounds. So then it's just a question of how particularly poor, or say Shaqiri, or if they've got any particular sort of war that they escaped, or and
I know what you mean. Like, I disagree in the sense of Irish people. There's players being produced in Scotland, and there'll be players being produced in Ireland. The problem is, especially from an Irish context, lads get to 15, 16 and we're throwing them off to England, and you've got lads who maybe are coming from disadvantaged backgrounds, and you're expecting them to, at 15 or 16 years of age, have the foresight to be able to kind of live away from home and then build a career for themselves, probably get more money than they've ever had. Like, that's the issue. Like, there are footballers being produced, and you see now it's going to be changed, and hopefully with the kind of introduction of the kind of the national leagues and what the FA are trying to do. Like, this is yesterday, kind of a plug from a piece that's a day old, but I spoke to Jack Chute, who was actually running in the Dublin Marathon today, and this was a lad who played for Cherry Orchard. He's from Lucan, like, smashing little footballer, goes to Derby County, and then he was there for 3 years. He gets told on Monday, this is about 2015 when he's 19, that we don't want you, so he's taken away, never finishes leaving cert, gets told we don't actually want you now after 3 years. And that was on the Monday. He travels down to Portsmouth 4 hours, goes on trial at Portsmouth, and Paul Cook is the manager, former Sligo manager, and he's told, you have a week training. He's staying in a hotel with someone he's never met before, another Irish lad who's been brought over to try and live the dream. Staying in a hotel with a fella he hasn't known for a week, plays a trial match after doing all the training sessions all week, plays quite well, but then is told in the dressing room, actually, we don't want you. He packs up all the stuff into his 1.2 litre Opel Corsa, drives 6 hours from Portsmouth to Holyhead, rings his man in the meantime saying, "Man, I'm coming home." On the Monday, he's working in a factory in Blanchardstown. You know what I mean? Now, like, so that ties in with terms of the problem with sending Irish footballers over at 15 years of age. And what other walk?
Just to be told no.
Yeah, and what other walk of life would you expect a 15-year-old to leave home and go and fend for themselves, essentially?
Although I guess it's always been like that. I mean, the famous image for me is all like John Giles being packed off on the boat at the age of 14 by his mother with a pound note sort of stitched into the lining of his jacket, and not even to Manchester, to go to Liverpool, to then get a train from Liverpool to Manchester to meet someone that he didn't know what he looked like, etc. Crazy stuff.
The problem is, though, when there could have been 20 John Giles who have never made it. Lads who've gone over and had as much talent as John Giles. John Giles is just the character he was, obviously was able to make a totally different time. That's the problem, is that those lads are lost in the system over there that's broken even for English lads. So, like...
Yeah, I always remember there was in Athlone, Dennis Clark, brilliant player. I mean, I went to school with him, and the other one of these guys who was just ridiculously better than everybody else, and is definitely going to become an international superstar. But, like, for one reason or another, like, he went to, I think, Derby County and maybe Manchester City. I can't remember, but certainly when Derby County, when they were a big club, like, well, he eventually finished up back at Athlone and Rovers, and he had a very good career in League of Ireland football, and was still kind of a outstanding player. But it's just how Dennis Clark never became it was just luck, really, I think. You know what I mean? You can just go to the wrong club. His only thing was he was quite small. He was, right, or 5'4" or something like that. Yeah. But I mean, he was a midfield player. He didn't have to be, he wasn't a centre forward or anything like that. So it wasn't like a great issue, you would have thought. And he wasn't slightly built or anything like that. And so it just seemed to be kind of bad luck, as you say. Like, you just get the wrong coach, or who look at, you're too small, goodbye, right? Or is it just some idiot who kind of takes the wrong impression of you or whatever. And once something like that happens and it doesn't click with you the first time, you know, once you come back to Ireland, then it must be much harder to do it. But it was always a complete mystery to me, like, and it can only have been kind of just you got the wrong breaks or a bit of someone who didn't understand how good he was.
Like, it's mad, but like you say there about it's a mystery why he never made it. Like, part of it would be...
Well, he made it in Ireland. He had a successful career in Ireland, but like, what we all thought, it was like the whole town knew that Dennis was going to be a superstar, you know, and...
I suppose it's how you determine success and how you determine making it. Like, it's just been the culture. We talked about earlier about the culture in GAA and all the rest. The culture in Irish football has always been, go to England, if you do it there, well done, you're a success. But you have to kind of get an insight into some of the lads. Like, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, Patrick McElhenney, one of the best players in the league. Stephen Kenny's been praising him. Sort of said this is a lad who could play for Ireland. Like, he's a smashing footballer. Like, when Dundalk were in the Europa League a couple of years ago, he was just class, absolutely class. But like, I remember the lads would have all done interviews with him. Like, he was going on trials from the age of 9. Going to clubs, you know what I mean? And like every weekend, every holiday, age of 9, going to here, there and everywhere. And him even saying by 16, even when he chose Sunderland in the end, just because it was a club that was similar to Derry, he sort of felt comfortable. But he just, within like a couple of months, he was sick of it and came home. Like, that's part of it. Like, the problem here, we've totally gone off topic, I know, but like, it's just, there's, like, even Stephen Kenny mentioned it in his notes, there should be, the goal shouldn't be sending lads off at 14, 15 years of age, try and make a career for yourself over in League One, like Leighton Orient or somewhere like that, you know what I mean? Like how is that success, you know what I mean?
There's an obvious link here to a piece by Sam Wallace that's printed in the Sunday Indo from the Telegraph. Financial woes threatening to topple El Clasico giants.
That's today.
That's the clear link here, isn't it? I mean, but it's basically suggesting that Barca and Real Madrid have no money, and or at least that their finances are, you know, either chaotic or, you know, they put out results that are, you know, for a period just before they have to pay all the money that they have to pay, you know, that stuff, right? But Liverpool are listed by, in Barcelona's financial figures published this month, show that Liverpool are their single biggest creditor, with €118 million plus significant add-ons still pending for the sale of Philippe Coutinho. So that at one level is a consolation to me, because I'm seeing little sort of niggles about Roberto Firmino maybe being in Barcelona, being interested in him. So maybe if you can give us the 118 million first for Coutinho,
we'll talk after that.
Maybe we'll talk, right? But it puts a lot of these things into perspective, like that everyone automatically assumes now that the really top players in England will naturally, you know, as night follows day, finish up at either Real or Barca. But a lot of this seems to be just, you know, Trumpian. Their finances are like, you know, are they very rich or very poor? We don't know. Do you know what I mean? Maybe Real Madrid is actually the poorest club in the world rather than the richest club. But they seem to be. It's all done with mirrors and all this kind of stuff. So maybe we needn't assume anymore that Eden Hazard is going to go to Real Madrid, and maybe Liverpool will stop being a feeder club for Barca as well. But I like to see that, you know.
Haven't Madrid sort of gotten away from that whole Galactico kind of project as well, haven't it? They kind of brought through a lot of their own players as well, but it's actually gas seeing that the Madrid and Barcelona. Imagine if they went the way of Rangers or something like that, and then there's like Spanish football without the two best teams. Like.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, you know, seeing a headline like that on a day where it's going to be the first El Clasico for, I think, 10, 11 years that neither Ronaldo nor Messi will have been playing it.
Yeah, I mean, it is amazing, but it's fascinating. They're just all these transfer deals, right? You know, just how little we know. I mean, they really treat us like fools. You know, they like. I mean, the very minimum Liverpool fans would have assumed was that we were going to get about 100 million in cash.
Yeah.
cash in hand, like, do you know what I mean, right? And,
What's your IBAN number?
you know, we know nothing. We know absolutely, yeah, but you're big on it, yeah. But here's the way the deals are structured, right? Two of those extras, these are the extras, right? 10 million when Barcelona qualify for 2 more editions of the Champions League. Okay, that should be okay. And 20 million for 100 games, if he plays 100 games. And another 5 million is due were Barcelona to win the Champions League. So the great thing is if and when Liverpool are playing Barca in the final of the Champions League this year, if Barca win, they get 5 million anyway, you know, which, you know, that's if they have it. You know, they're supposed to get 5 million. They're supposed to get 10 million. They're supposed to get... So, you know, we're assuming that these finest negotiators, because it takes ages. It takes like months to do these transfer deals. I was fascinated by this. How hard can it be? You know, can we buy him for 150 million? Okay. No, they just send us the money.
Didn't David De Gea was supposed to go to Real Madrid a couple of years ago, and that move didn't happen because the fax machine didn't.
Fax machine, bro.
The fax machine doesn't.
What are they still using? Fax machines?
I know, it just ties in with it, kind of.
Yeah, it's bizarre. You would think at the very least that, you know, they would arrange for... So it must be, the reason it takes so long is that sort of, yeah, we'd like to buy the player for 170 million. Unfortunately, we have no money. Yeah. Is that okay? You know,
have them on tick.
Right, you know, like it's nonsense. Like it's and it, again, God, if only we knew what was really going on, wouldn't that be great? But we don't.
Okay, guys. Well, we're almost out of time here now. Thanks to David Sneyd of the Irish Daily Mail and Mail on Sunday for coming in. Declan Lynch, as always, from the Sunday Independent. Thanks for joining us. This will be podcasted later on today, and we'll also be live on Off the Ball from 1 o'clock on News Talk. 2 Premier League games for you this afternoon with Crystal Palace against Arsenal. That'll be at 1:30, and then we'll be over to Old Trafford with Nathan Murphy and Brian Kerr for Manchester United against Everton. But until then, thanks for watching.
The Sunday The Ball.
Thanks to Screwfix.ie, championing the trade with a dedicated call centre.